What if the most important battlefield in the Iran war is not a missile site, not a nuclear facility, and not even the Strait of Hormuz? What if it is a 5-mile island that most people have never heard of? A small piece of land surrounded by blue water. Too small to look threatening, too remote to appear on most maps. But hidden on that island is something every military planner understands. A country's ability to keep fighting. Because wars are not won only by destroying weapons. Sometimes they are decided by controlling the system that creates those weapons. And right now, that system has a name. KHARG Island. Tehran believed it had discovered the limit of American pressure. The theory was simple. Washington could threaten. Washington could strike. But eventually, Washington would hesitate. Eventually, the economic cost would become too high. The political pressure would force a pause. And when President Trump canceled a planned strike window in June after renewed discussions with Tehran, Iranian officials believed they had found proof. They thought they had seen the American ceiling. But they misunderstood what they were watching. Because restraint and weakness are not the same thing. And the difference between those two ideas may determine what happens next. The story everyone saw was about missiles. Iran launching. America responding. Israel defending. A familiar cycle of escalation. It was about a single question. How much pressure can a country absorb before the foundation beneath its military power begins to crack? And that brings us to the hero of this story. Not a general. Not a fighter jet. Not a missile. On a satellite image, KHARG Island appears almost insignificant. A thin piece of land sitting in the Persian Gulf. The picture changes. Loading facilities. Deep water ports. A network built around one purpose. Moving Iranian oil into the global economy. For more than 60 years, this island has been the funnel through which Iran's energy exports have flowed. Energy is military power. Every missile program, every drone factory, every regional operation eventually connects back to revenue. And much of that revenue passes through this one location. The first contradiction appears here. KHARG Island looks like an economic target. But the deeper truth is that it is a military target disguised as infrastructure. Because destroying weapons only reduces capability. Controlling the source of funding changes the entire equation. This is why the island became central long before the current escalation. When the United States launched strikes against Iranian positions on KHARG Island, the decision itself revealed something important. The goal was not simply destruction. The goal was demonstration. American forces reportedly struck military positions around the island while avoiding the oil infrastructure itself. That choice mattered, because the message was not, we can reach your economy whenever we choose. And that creates a different kind of pressure. A missile destroys a building. A demonstration changes decision-making. The lesson here is that modern warfare is often about controlling options before using force. The weapon is not always the bomb. Sometimes the weapon is the uncertainty created by knowing the bomb exists. But Tehran interpreted that signal differently. And this is where the next contradiction begins. Iran saw a limited strike. Washington saw controlled escalation. Iran saw hesitation. Washington saw leverage. Those two interpretations could not both be correct. And every future decision would depend on which side understood reality first. Because the island was never only about oil. It was about perception. For months, Iranian leaders operated under the assumption that America wanted to avoid a larger conflict. And there was evidence supporting that belief. The United States had diplomatic channels open. The United States had delayed certain actions. The United States had repeatedly shown caution. But here is the problem. Great powers often use restraint because they are choosing timing, not because they lack capability. That difference has changed the course of many conflicts throughout history. A commander who mistakes patience for weakness often discovers the difference too late. And KHARG Island became the place where that misunderstanding collided with reality. Because the island sits at the intersection of four battlefields. The first is military. Who controls the surrounding airspace and sea lanes? The second is technological. Can advanced surveillance and precision weapons neutralize Iran's defenses? The third is economic. Can Tehran continue financing a prolonged conflict if its export lifeline is threatened? What happens when a regional conflict begins affecting global energy markets? This is why KHARG Island matters far beyond Iran. A tanker leaving this island is not just carrying oil. It represents global supply chains, factories thousands of miles away, fuel prices, political pressure, market confidence. A decision made on a small island can appear on screens around the world within hours. But the most important part of this story is not what happened. It is what Iran believed happened. Because wars are often shaped by miscalculation. And Tehran may have made one. After the initial strikes, Iranian planners appeared to assume the conflict would follow a familiar pattern. Exchange missiles. Absorb damage. A war of endurance. But Washington was approaching the problem differently. Instead of trying only to defeat Iranian weapons, it was targeting the system that allowed Iran to sustain the fight. Because a country can replace a radar, it can rebuild a missile launcher, it can repair a command center, but replacing a strategic economic artery is far more complicated. And that brings us to the question hiding underneath the entire conflict. What happens when a country discovers that the battlefield is not where the explosions happen? What if the real battlefield is the infrastructure that makes the explosions possible? Because the next stage of this war may not be decided by who launches the most missiles. It may be decided by who controls the ability to keep launching them. And this is where the story moves beyond KHARG Island itself. Because the island is only the visible piece. Not control of territory. Control of choices. And that is the battlefield most people are not watching. Everyone thinks this war is about missiles. About whether Iran can survive another wave of American strikes. But the real battle is about something much harder to see. Decision-making under pressure. Sometimes it is the one that forces the enemy to make a decision before they are ready. Not because it was captured. Not because it was destroyed. But because every military planner in Tehran now has to ask the same question. How much risk can we accept before the foundation of our strategy becomes vulnerable? That is the hidden battlefield. The battlefield behind the battlefield. For decades, Iran built its strategy around one central idea. If it could not defeat a stronger opponent directly, it could create enough uncertainty to make the opponent hesitate. Drones, proxy forces, maritime pressure. Make the cost of action higher than the cost of waiting. But KHARG Island exposed a weakness in that strategy. Because uncertainty works in both directions. Iran can create uncertainty for America. But America can create uncertainty for Iran. And the island became the point where those two strategies collided. The visible war was about explosions. The invisible war was about confidence. Could Tehran still believe its economic lifeline was protected? Could Washington convince Tehran that every option remained available? The answer to those questions could determine the next phase. Because military power is not only about what you can do. During the Iran-Iraq war, Iraq understood the importance of energy infrastructure. Oil terminals became targets because they represented more than fuel. They represented national survival. The lesson was simple. A country's economy is often part of its military architecture. Destroy the weapons, and the enemy loses capability. And the enemy begins questioning the future. That principle has returned in the current conflict. But this time, the technology has changed. The battlefield has become transparent. Satellites watch movement. Drones collect intelligence. Aircraft gather electronic information before weapons are launched. A modern strike campaign is no longer simply about aircraft flying toward targets. It is about an entire information network deciding what the enemy can no longer hide. Inside command centers thousands of miles away, operators are not just looking for missiles. They are looking for patterns. Where are systems moving? Which defenses remain active? Which facilities are being repaired? The bomb is only the final step. The real weapon is the decision process that happens before it. And this creates another contradiction. The United States has overwhelming technological superiority. But technology creates its own problem. The more precise a military becomes, the more pressure there is to use precision carefully. A country with massive capability still has political limits. Military success is not simply destroying targets. It is achieving objectives without creating a larger war than intended. That is the dilemma surrounding KHARG Island. But using those options creates consequences. A strike is one thing. A seizure is something entirely different. Taking control of an island requires more than air power. Aircraft, logistics, and most importantly, a plan for what happens after the victory image disappears. Because capturing territory is usually easier than controlling it. History repeatedly shows this. The battlefield does not end when the flag changes. Sometimes that is when the hardest part begins. And this is where the strategic calculation becomes complicated. A KHARG Island operation could pressure Iran economically, but it could also create a long-term military commitment. It could weaken Tehran, but it could also expand the conflict. It could demonstrate American dominance, but it could also force Iran to escalate elsewhere. This is the paradox of modern power. Every advantage creates a new responsibility. And that leads to the biggest lesson from this conflict. The strongest military does not always win by using the most force. Sometimes it wins by controlling the choices available to everyone else. That is why the island matters. KHARG Island is not simply an oil terminal. It is a strategic question. Can a country maintain pressure without crossing the line that creates a larger war? Can adversaries survive by making every step expensive enough? Can economic warfare achieve what military force cannot? Because the same problem exists across the world. In the Indo-Pacific, in Eastern Europe, in the South China Sea, modern conflicts are increasingly becoming contests between systems, not armies. A missile system, an industrial base. The battlefield has expanded, and the countries that understand this change will have an advantage. The lesson here is simple. A weapon is no longer only the object that explodes. A weapon can be the factory that builds it, the port that funds it, the network that guides it. This is why KHARG Island represents something larger than Iran. It represents the transformation of warfare itself. The old question was, who has the strongest military? The new question is a dangerous misunderstand this. Who controls the systems that allow military power to continue? Because a fighter jet needs fuel. A missile needs factories. A military campaign needs money. And money needs infrastructure. The island is powerful because it sits at the beginning of that chain, not the end. And that is why every government watching this conflict is studying the same thing. Not only what America does next, but what Iran learns from it. Because every war creates lessons. The question is who collects them. A country under attack studies how to survive. A country watching from outside studies how to prepare. And somewhere else, another military planner is looking at this conflict and asking a different question. What happens if this happens to us? That is the global meaning of KHARG Island. The battle is not only about Iran's oil. It is about the future of strategic pressure. Can economic choke points replace traditional military campaigns? Can precision weapons change political calculations? Can a stronger power force change without becoming trapped by the consequences? Nobody has the final answer yet. And that uncertainty is exactly why this conflict matters. Because the next generation of wars may not begin with an invasion. They may begin with a satellite image, a shipping route, a financial calculation, a single piece of infrastructure that suddenly becomes more important than an entire battlefield. The question is no longer who has the most weapons. The real question is who controls the systems that make weapons powerful. The decisive battlefield may not be where soldiers fight. It may be where nations decide how much they are willing to risk. So the question is if KHARG Island proves that controlling infrastructure can be as powerful as controlling territory, will future wars be won by destroying enemy forces, or by controlling the systems that allow those forces to exist?